Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Today, we'll be talking about something on everyone's mind, project success. What does it look like? How might we get ourselves there? Just want to take a few minutes to cover our logistics. I see some people are still joining, so while everyone is logging on, we can just cover our bases here. We are targeting a 1-hour event. We try to be courteous of people's time and not take too much of it, but we will leave a full 15 minutes to answer any questions you might have for our presenters. Feel free to enter any of those questions or thoughts you have into that Q&A box on the screen as we go along. We'll be monitoring it. Don't worry, you won't interrupt us. But we'll have a lot of dialogue and want to add you to the conversation. If there's something you have an opinion on, maybe we miss, happy to address it. We're an agile group over here, so we love hearing your thoughts as well. All your lines are on mute, so you do need to type those questions in. If you're trying to raise your hand, please just send them in the chat or the Q&A box and we'll go ahead and address that. If you're having sound issues, sometimes if you use the phone number, that helps a little bit better. But yeah, hopefully that helps. Try logging out, logging back in, anything like that. We do have a good turnout today, so wouldn't want to drown anyone out without the mute on. Also wanted to point out that we are recording the session today. So for those that can't join, or if you like a certain part of this and want to pass it along, send the recording. We'll definitely send the slides and recording after the event. Give us a day maybe, and we'll have those over to you. So don't worry, you can sit back, relax, and don't have to take notes. We get asked this a lot. It looks like we've been asked this already, so I'll say it again. We will be recording the event and sharing the recording for anybody that attended or registered, so don't worry, you'll have all the information we cover today. My name is Lindsay Marymont. I'm on the marketing team here at Keyed In, and with me here today is Chris Riva with Virtual Hold Technology. Chris is the Director of Professional Services, so he runs projects as a business. Chris has a wealth of project knowledge. I've been fortunate enough to get to know him a little bit as we've worked together on this project and some others, and I'm really impressed with what he and the team have been able to do over there at Virtual Hold. His over 20 years experience put into play have gotten the team to a place where projects are driving the business, so he's really knowledgeable about what drives success and what makes a difference. Also here with me today is my colleague, Tim Short. He runs our professional services organization here at Keyed In, also a very seasoned veteran of the industry, most recently coming from Workfront. He's a really valuable member of the team, a strong resource for our customers to lean on. He works really closely with all kinds of project managers, PMO leaders, services executives, so he sees firsthand every day how projects are executed and how to really set up for success from the start. So really lucky to have both these presenters here with us today. What likely brought everyone here today was the topic of project success. But before we talk about how we can be successful, let's take a step back and look at why projects are successful. Maybe because they deliver on time and on budget? Sure, if that's what you're measured against. But does that in and of itself mean success for the business? Maybe because the projects deliver on stakeholder expectations? That's better. Any stakeholder that gets what they thought they were going to get is probably going to call that a win. Maybe because they do that all and support the goals of the organization. Yeah, we like that. But ultimately, what we're after here is predictability. We want to know what to expect, when to expect it, and how much it's going to cost us. Pretty easy, right? Right. So what gets in the way of predictability then? Well, I can tell you one thing, those pesky fire drills. Executives coming at you, asking you for an additional feature or updates out of the blue, especially when they're your services executive and you're in marketing and they always need, just kidding, Tim. Yeah, that one's a little backwards. Anytime someone has a bright idea that needs to happen right now, where everything's just gonna break, you get the idea, those fire drills. Also not separating what's urgent from what's important, getting stuck in the what's next and not what's right to be working on. That can definitely get in the way of predictability. Gathering data in a timely manner. I love this one. Searching through 4 different systems to try to find something. Updating a spreadsheet to show your quarter end results. Always a quarter behind because it takes that long to put all the data together. That'll disrupt your flow of predictability. How about getting the team to just use the tools you have? There's an idea. This one isn't self-serving at all. But seriously, all those disparate systems, chasing down timesheets, expense reports, that all hinders your ability to accurately predict project performance because you have lack of time or data or both. Now, enough of the doom and gloom. Let's move on to what does predict success. What are these magic pillars that were promised to us? Let me pass it over to Tim to fill us in on number 1.
Thank you, Lindsay. So as Lindsay said, what we're trying to do and what we'd hope to talk to, it sounds like a whole group of project managers and I'm sure many PMPs, is talk about the principles of project management that sometimes aren't as talked about, especially when you go through and you obtain your PMP. So about 10 years ago, I had a chance to go through and go through the obtaining of a PMP. And it was an interesting exercise for me. And one of the things that I've learned since going through and learning about the PMI way, as many of us have heard, is that there is a missing element that we have to determine as project managers. And those elements to me have become the predictive analytics or the aspects of doing the project as a whole. And so I've come up with three components that I feel are important. And we'll get to the slide and talk about what capacity planning is. But how is it that as project managers, we determine whether or not something is the right opportunity in the right time, and do we have the right people to do that? And so when I went in for an interview once for a particular job role, the interviewer, and that individual ultimately became my boss, asked me a very specific question. And that question kind of caught me off guard. What he asked me was, Tim, what is capacity planning? And he asked me in such a way that I could tell he was kind of trying to trick me up a bit. And my answer initially was, well, it's whether or not we have the appropriate amount of resources to do the work that a project needs. And he said, that's the answer that most people give. But I would submit that it's something a little bit more than that capacity planning has an input of resource availability, but it is much more meaningful than resource availability. And he taught me a really valuable lesson. And since then, it's one that I've been able to share with people with whom I'm lucky enough to work, both with clients and with employees. And I've had the opportunity since that conversation of implementing project management software to about 500 different clients, everywhere from the small business up to the large enterprise. And the thing that businesses are ultimately trying to get to is this capacity planning. And what capacity planning, though it has an input of resource management, really means, and what I believe it really means, is it's the output of all available resources that have the right skill, that have the right time under the auspice of right opportunity. In other words, what is it that the company has capability, or what capability does the company have as a whole to doing project effort? So we have a myriad of resources inside of an organization, and those resources are going to do the work. But what about the opportunities that continue to flood in for those resources to do? So Lindsay talked a little bit about urgent versus important. Urgent are the things that when I had a chance to establish an enterprise PMO, that I saw executives doing over and over and over again. Every single bright, shiny object, and I eventually ended up lovingly calling those niches, thanks to J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series. They would chase that snitch at every opportunity. They would go to an event and they would see something that would excite them, that they felt like our business could do better than somebody else, or could invent and target a certain area of an industry. And they would come back to the organization and to me, and at that time I was the head of the enterprise PMO, and say, we've got to go do this thing. And oftentimes, more often than not, and I'm sure many as PMs on the phone and many that are part of PMOs especially, we went and did them. because it was an executive mandate. And what ended up happening is our people became overloaded. Our time became stretched on everything that we had previously decided that we wanted to do, and now that we hope to do more. And the opportunities ultimately came under jeopardy, and in some cases actually slipped away. And so this concept of capacity planning is taking the inputs of the opportunity as in whole, anything that anybody brings into the organization, whether it's urgent or important, and analyzing that against the capability and skills of the individuals with whom we have, and those individuals' time and how much time they would have available to put into the effort of the actual projects, which we've already decided were important to the organization. And then laying that out, overlaying that against all potential opportunities and determining what is our capacity to do a specific opportunity. And a little later on, I want to talk a little bit about an output of that exercise that we did in this enterprise PMO at this particular organization. But I felt and I have found that organizations are really trying to get to capacity planning. What can our company do with all of the inbound opportunities with the restriction of the resources or funds that we have is ultimately the capacity planning. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of reasons that professional services organizations and project management offices feel that they need automation tools. And here at Keaton, we're lucky enough to have a partnership with the Resource Management Institute. And the Resource Management Institute did a survey based on two components, professional and consulting services organizations. And they asked the question to they and to enterprise IT organizations, those like where I had the opportunity to be the head of the PMO. What is it, or why is it that you think that you need automation tools for your organization? And you can see the data is pretty overwhelming that the first and most relevant answer for this survey was, well, we need to ensure that our resources are assigned and in some ways managed so that they know what to be working on. And if you know that comes into play tremendously into capacity planning. And then the next thing is, well, those resources with whom we make assignments, we need to be able to ensure for professional services organizations that their time is managed. We need to know where and what they're working on. But it's a little bit different for the enterprise IT. The thing that became more important to those project managers versus those more resource managed oriented people is, well, I need to be able to report on the efforts of our individuals and the projects as a whole. But then it kind of comes back together, and both types of organizations with whom I've had the opportunity to primarily work is project management. We need tools to assist us in project management. And so you'll note that about 60-ish blended percent of both organizational types have said I need tools to assist with project management. And then interestingly, the enterprise IT or the PMO-like offices then say, well, then we need to manage time. So the enterprise organizations are less concerned about the recordation of the time of their individuals, but they are still very concerned about ensuring those individuals are assigned to the right body of work. And then reporting is then important to the PSOs, and then we come together again on the financial management. And so you can see that the elements of capacity planning, whether you're a professional services organization or a project management office, are largely related to capacity planning. And I bet if we ask these same individuals, what is capacity planning, like was asked of me, their answer would be similar. Well, it's resource management. And again, it's an element of capacity planning, but ultimately capacity planning is with the resources that we have under management, what is our capacity as an organization to deliver the opportunities with which we'd like to work. Next slide. So true capacity planning, what is it? Well, true capacity planning is a practice that enables us to know if we have the right opportunity, if we have the right people with the right skills, and if the opportunity fits within the confines of the right time. And these automated tools that people are looking for, in my experience, dealing with about 500 of these, this is typically the output that they're trying to get to. I just need help in making sure that my people are working on the right thing, that we're doing it in the right time, and that ultimately I really have the right people to do it. And this gives us the ability to say no to those executives who often come in having been at an event and chasing that loving snitch and saying, let's do the next thing. And it gives us our ability to impact time, duration, sequencing, and so forth. And I mentioned earlier that I would come back to kind of a full 360 when I was the head of an enterprise PMO. And when I sat in meetings where executives would come and ask us, and I'm sure with the many PMPs and project managers that we have on the phone, that many of you have been in these circumstances. I have yet to meet one to where we haven't had the opportunity, let's call it, to sit and listen to executives tell us, let's do more, because there's this really cool thing. Well, doing more doesn't always do the company well. And I continue to hear this as the head of the enterprise PMO, let's do more, let's do more, let's do more. And as a result of this trend and the frustration of the project teams, I finally was able to put together through automated tools. We had a project management system that was more of a work management system. And then I utilized customized spreadsheets and came up with this methodology of capacity planning, not even knowing what it was, but we're trying to do too much with the resources we have, and every time we add something on, something failed. And so we had an opportunity with a very large company, one of the biggest in the world. It was Walmart. Walmart asked us to bid on a certain component of their vitamins, minerals, and supplements line. And it was a significant opportunity for the organization. Everybody agreed. However, nobody on the executive leadership team wanted to give up the thing that was already in play. And so I put this capacity planning methodology into play, again, not even knowing I was doing quote unquote capacity planning. I was just trying to help our teams from being so frustrated. And I still remember very vividly to this day, after I executed it and sent out a note telling our executive leadership team, no, we can't do this with all of these other things on our plate. The CFO of the organization walked into my office and he said, I have the CEO on the phone. He'd like to talk to you. And I've never had a personal delivery of one executive delivering the phone of another who could have just called me, but you could tell he was pretty hot and wound up about this. And I remember him getting on the phone and I said, hello. And immediately he said, are you telling me that we just brought your office to its knees? And I remember being extremely nervous, but replying, no, I think you've brought your company to its knees. And it's time we decide what's most important. And is this the most important component for us to do under the availability of this team, or is it the things that we have? A decision needs to be made because here's our capacity. And on that phone call, the CEO was very quiet for a few seconds. And then he said, fine, we'll go with the measures that you have. Let's do this Walmart deal. And you tell me what we have to stop. And we did. We told him what we had to put on hold as a result. And coincidentally enough, it was the right decision for the organization. We were able to prove through the elements of capacity planning what the company should do. And at that time, we were doing just over $100 million in revenues. And this one particular deal that we decided to level into and do for Walmart added $35 million to the annual revenues. So the ability to say no when you've gone through the exercises of capacity planning is the thing that we're trying to get to and is a major element of project success. With that ability to say no, you can confidently communicate the impact of taking on any additional work, what it does to the work that you're already doing. And it's the number one thing, again, that organizations are trying to get to. So with that, I think Chris has got number two. So I'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, next up, we've got forecasting. I'm a little moved by the capacity planning speech, Tim, I'm not gonna lie, but we'll move on. Now let's take a look at the second pillar of forecasting. Forecasting is an interesting one because it's something we all do to some degree, but the better we can get at forecasting, the more credibility and trust we can gain within the organization. This is really the next step on the way to becoming predictable, and of course, it's no easy feat. Forecasting is hindered again by our tools, processes, and constantly moving targets. It's challenging to get right unless we're in the cookie cutter business. It's tough to forecast accurately and maintain a continuous forecast. But anything worth doing typically isn't easy. So, Chris, I think we're going to learn a little bit of the secret sauce here.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I'm not so sure it's secret sauce necessarily. These all the folks on the phone, I'm sure, are familiar with most of the issues that you run into when you're looking at forecasting. But wanted to touch on what I consider some of the pillars of the forecasting effort in terms of project management. So, according to our understanding of forecasting, there are several. There are about 5 major categories in terms of best practices and things you need to focus on when you're doing your forecasting. The first one that we're going to talk about is understanding the bandwidth or work in progress for your resources. This really is one of the keys to forecasting. Whether we're forecasting revenues or whether we're forecasting milestones, it really is one of the keys. So as we know, project scheduling is heavily dependent on a resource's ability to complete the work. Whether that's to Tim's point a minute ago, the capacity of the resource, whether it's skill set, or what different variable it is that adds into that resource's ability to complete that work. So different roles require different levels of information. So when we're talking about forecasting overall, we need to understand what each resource is working on. And different people may need different viewpoints or different information when they're looking at WIP or bandwidth. So for example, if I'm a project manager, I may just need to know what my resources that are working on my projects have on their plates so I can understand what their competing activities and tasks might be. However, if you take it up a level, a resource manager may need to know what all their resources are working on so that they know where this work needs to go. And then from the enterprise perspective, we have to have an understanding of what everyone is working on, right? So there's different levels of need from the micro level to the macro level in terms of what's needed. So at VHT, I'm kind of fortunate because I actually manage both all the project managers as well as all the engineers that are doing the work on my projects. So I kind of have a micro and a macro view of all the resources. So I imagine all the folks on the phone have different levels of responsibility, and that's why it's important for them to see different levels of the work that's going on. Communication is also another important piece of forecasting. Understanding what the enterprise-wide demand is allows us to do some more accurate forecasting. And communication is a theme that I continually come back to. I actually have the definition of communication hanging up on my wall in my office because I think it's that important. And anytime I'm having any difficulty communicating with any of the people that I'm trying to talk to, I always refer to that and point to the communication definition, which is the imparting or exchanging of information or news, or the means of connection between people or places in particular. So, I always like to say that you can deliver any message in the world. It's all in how you deliver that particular message. So I think communication is key. So here at VHT, we have multiple ways that we communicate, and we do it frequently, right? We can do it via email, obviously phone, text, face-to-face, and there are various ways and purposes for communication. So we do in-person meetings with the project managers once a week, just so everyone can level set on what they're working on and what the demands are from the team. The integration engineers, our engineers, also have weekly meetings so they can understand exactly what's going on from their perspective as well. But understanding what that enterprise-wide demand is a lot harder than it sounds most of the time. So we need to be able to adjust where everyone's work is being placed. Also, we all share resources. Or I should say, we share resources. Many people share resources. So understanding what those other resources are working on is important. So I like to talk about forecasting at a high level. I'll give you a little background on what my forecasting used to look like. So at the end of every quarter, this is back in my day years ago when we used to, before we had any software tools, we would use spreadsheets. So I had to laugh at Tim's Tim's comment on the customized capacity planning spreadsheet that he was working on, because we had a customized forecasting spreadsheet that we worked on. And our typical quarterly fire drill was, 3 days or 4 days before the end of the quarter, the CEO walks around talking about how he needs to know what the forecasts are for the end of the quarter so that he can talk to the chairman of the board and all that. And so it was a typical fire drill where all of the PMs are running around with their spreadsheets, trying to update that information, trying to understand what the revenue forecast was for the quarter, trying to figure out where every project was in terms of status, so we knew what we were going to recognize. And every quarter we would expect that fire drill, and every quarter we were unprepared for that fire drill because our day-to-day tasks took us away from focusing on and keeping track of what that looked like. So we've come a long way from that fire drill spreadsheet practice that we used to do. Our PSA has really helped us focus on that and keep an updated tally. So the quote on there, "Are you telling me it will improve my forecast?" That kind of comes from a story that when I was in a meeting with our CEO and our senior leadership, I was pushing to get a PSA purchased and utilized for the PMO, and was trying to justify the budget. And so our CEO looked at me and he said, "Chris, so what you're telling me is if we actually spend this money, then our forecasts are going to get much more accurate, correct?" And I said, "Yes, Wes, of course I'm telling you that, just with my fingers crossed and hoping that that was going to be the case," which actually did turn out to be true. So that definitely helped us. One of the other pillars of forecasting is learning from experience, right? History and experience help us improve our precision in forecasting. But one piece that's important in forecasting is always making sure that we understand that these things change. So our understanding of the work that might have been required to do a certain type of project 3 years ago it may not necessarily be the same work that's required today. There are software changes, resource changes, technology changes. They're constantly forcing us to reevaluate whether or not the estimates and the time frames and the amount of effort that we're putting into these projects is going to be changing, and we need to stay on top of that as well. Also, assessment of our resources, understanding exactly where our resource skill sets are, right? So we need to understand their strengths and weaknesses. We need to make sure that we have the right people doing the right work, kind of to piggyback on Tim's comment earlier. Always understanding, does resource A have the right skill set? Is it going to take them longer to actually do this work than if I put a more highly skilled resource on this to knock it out a little faster? And then finally, understanding a more in-depth understanding of the components of the work that's going to be involved, help us understand those timelines and schedules. So it's important for us as project managers to always be looking at more of a micro level on the work that's required. What are the different components that are going to be required to get this off the ground? What activities are going to be required to do that? And what might I expect in the way of delays and those types of things, help us understand exactly what that looks like. The next one's prioritizing focus, right? So Tim, I think Tim's example of the capacity planning was really important in terms of prioritizing focus. So he was able to convince his senior leadership that it was important that they take as much focus as they could and put it on that new project that was coming in that was really going to help them drive their revenue. And he kind of put that back on the stakeholders to say, hey, if we're going to meet this requirement, meet this timeline, then you need to tell me what I can put down. So allowing our stakeholders to determine the priority of our work is important. So every week here at VHT, we meet together as a project team and we kind of go through what our projects look like and what resources have on their plates. And we do it by resource. So I might say, hey, Dave's got this go live today and he's got XYZ this week he's got to worry about. And I let my other project managers weigh in on what they're requiring Dave to do during the week. And that they negotiate that piece of it to say, all right, I can probably put off some work if you've got to go live this week because you really need him to get that off the ground and live. So we do a lot of negotiation, not just among the project team or the project management team, but also with the stakeholders. So if I have somebody from our sales team who is coming in with something that's got to get done tomorrow, and they're really pushing us and our capacity is short, resources are tied up, then a lot of times I'll push that back on them and say, okay, what can I put down to pick this piece up? And if it's another salesperson's account that they're working on, those stakeholders need to negotiate amongst themselves to get that work prioritized. So encouraging negotiation, I think negotiation itself with a project manager is very important, but encouraging negotiation between stakeholders also helps us understand what those forecasts look like and keep us on track to get those forecasts done. And then removing obstacles. So obviously we want to identify any potential delays. We want to make sure that we see them early, we see them often. We do some in-depth risk analysis and risk management, and those are truly going to help us benefit from this early warning system, if you will, knowing what risks could delay our forecasts. And then we need to take action where we can to set realistic expectations or help remove those obstacles. Another thing is brainstorming. So brainstorming alternatives to overcome obstacles. Is there a different resource that I can use to get this work done in place of somebody's PTO or in the place of another priority project that's just come in? Is there another way that we can do this? Is there a workaround that we can use to help us stay on track with these particular forecasts? What if I substitute resources? What other workflows might be impacted by that work? And are they equally qualified to do the work, or are they less qualified, right? What tools might I use to get this off the ground? And are my resources familiar with those tools? Are these tools going to have any downstream impact to the project or to any of the deliverables? So those are some of the things that we talk about when we talk about forecasting. And one of the nice things about the forecasting piece, and I talked about communication just a little while ago, is I've got top to bottom communication now in place where I didn't have that prior to us really getting focused on doing this communication piece and using the PSA for it. So what we do is we meet weekly to talk about forecasts and talk about workload. We also have we use our PSA to drive data out to an internal web page that allows our senior leadership to pop into it at any time and see what our forecasts look like across the enterprise. So they can see exactly what PS revenue is expected to be for the quarter. They can also see where the projects are at any given time. And that forecasting, really refining our forecasting techniques and our tools has helped us really improve communication from, like I said, from top to bottom, all the way up to senior leadership.
Excellent. Sounds good. Next up, we have budget versus actuals. Tam, you want to take a stab at this
So
one?
you bet. So everybody's probably seeing a little bit of a theme here. We wanted to start with capacity planning, the coup de grace of project management, and what it is that I think that we're all trying to do. And then Chris followed on by forecasting. Well, if you don't forecast the work, if you don't assess what you are going to need to complete various bodies of work in one common area, you're not going to be able to capacity plan because you don't know what the call for work is or what the planned work is when you get a new opportunity on your plate, and it's difficult to be able to plan. Well, another component is budget versus actuals. So again, we're talking about this concept of ITTOs, and the PMPs, or those who have gone through any of the PMI certification will know what that is, because it's a huge component of obtaining a PMP. It's the inputs, the tools, the techniques, and the outputs. And largely what we're talking about are the inputs to capacity planning, and then sharing with you some of our ideas of the tools and techniques. And one of the things that we've determined is important is being able to assess a true budgeting process. And typically when you think of budgets, you think of money. But I would submit that when we're talking about the budgeting process, that it's not just the money. You need to, or we need to, as project managers, budget for, yes, money. I shared with you the example of when we happened to have an opportunity to do Walmart. Well, it was a pretty expensive project, and we had to make sure that, yeah, we could budget for the money. But in order to get the outputs that Walmart was requiring through the testing and assays of being able to do their product, we also had to budget a significant amount of other resources. So when you're thinking about your budget so that you can prove out the actuals or the captured reality of doing a project, I would submit that it's more than just the dollars. There should be a process of establishing a budget, not only for cost, but for HR. And again, you'll see the theme of time and individual, like Chris just mentioned, capability. Do you have the right people in the right place at the right time with the right amount of money to be able to go in and do this particular project? Because if you don't have any of those three components, it's likely that you should probably put that project on the back burner and continue with what you're doing. So if you don't have the right people, there are certainly things that you can do. And for example, you can do a make or buy analysis. Well, I have the right amount of money, I just don't have the right amount of people. And so you can add the HR component to your budget. And then, do we have everything that we need to get the project done on time? And the output of this budget versus actuals is, well, how's it going to impact the business? How did it impact the business? What changes can we make to keep the project from failing? And then again, the lion's share of the components that we're trying to get to is decision making. Executives are trying to make good decisions based on information that we're providing them. And so the question should be consistently asked, in my opinion, throughout a project life cycle: should we abort this? Is there something that we should be doing that we're not doing? And then the output of these tools and techniques, the final output is creating forecasts or templates of the effort of like projects for next time that we do that. So when we were given this topic, and where Chris and I met and came up with the 5 pillars that we feel are important to project success, it's really easy to talk about the planning elements of what project is, but we also need to take into consideration the actual elements so that we're always being able to make appropriate decisions. So next slide. Chris, how does that fill into utilization? What is utilization?
That dovetails nicely, Tim. Thank you. All right. So when talking about utilization, so some of the key pieces that I wanted to highlight are uh, appropriate resource assignment, right? So we want to make sure that we've got maximum efficiency, that we've got the right resource on the right job. And if a resource is unfamiliar or maybe inexperienced with the task, they may need to do some research or engage other more experienced people to help guide them or assist them. So this can lead to delays or add to non-billable work, right? Um, if I've got somebody and I assign them to a project with tasks they're unfamiliar with, there may be some amount of research or background that they need to upskill themselves on in order to complete those tasks. Likewise, highly skilled resources assigned to work that might maybe a lesser skilled resource could complete could also cause some downstream effects, right? We may not have the right resource on the right project because a lesser skilled resource could have completed that just as well. Also, when services, if you're a service organization, for example, there are some billing considerations that you may want to take in as you're assigning resources, right? Um, Sometimes having a lower billable utilization from someone who is more highly skilled, or I should say a more highly billable resource, can be acceptable, right? So the reason behind that is that you're able to charge more money, so your margin tends to be a little bit higher on that. But there are trade-offs, such as burnout, workloads, those types of things. So those are things that we need to consider when we're trying to consider what resource to assign to a particular task or project, and making sure that we work on the right thing at the right time. So high level enterprise-wide planning helps maximize our utilization. So when the resources are working on, let's say, multiple projects, for example, they may be performing some high level or enterprise-wide planning. It's going to maximize our utilization. And that's why I talked a little bit earlier about having visibility across the enterprise. It's important based on role to understand exactly what people are working on. And then scheduling activities amongst various project tasks will help reduce some conflicts and remove obstacles. And as I mentioned earlier, having our PMs all meet once a week to see what everyone is working on, helps us make sure that we're focusing on the right things at the right time, and that priorities are all being priorities are being prioritized correctly. That was a really poor English sentence right there, but I think it gets the idea across. Um, so additionally, delays in projects can cause adverse effects on utilization, right? So my engineers have all their projects assigned by priority, right? We talked about that a little bit earlier. And again, based on maybe what they've got to do that week, I've got to go live. I've got a milestone that I really need to get in this particular week or this particular month or this quarter. Those things are going to take precedent over maybe your day-to-day activities. And they are encouraged to work on projects in priority order. So the PMs know what the priority is. Your project number one is your number one priority this week. You work that until there's nothing more you can do. You move on to project two, which is your second priority. And we just kind of cycle through getting as much work done as we can as it becomes available and as their time allows, right? So basically, with all that being said, resources also do need downtime. So Lindsay, would you mind flipping the slide for me?
Gotcha.
Thank you. So resources do need downtime. So I've seen various targets on utilization anywhere between 70 and 75%. I don't know what necessarily the right percent of utilization is, and I really think that it would vary depending on what types of work they're doing, what types of services they're doing. If you're maybe a professional services organization, you might expect a little bit of a higher, or you probably would expect a little bit of a higher utilization than somebody who's maybe not a professional services organization. Our company actually has a game room. It's got a Wii, it's got an Xbox, it's got a foosball table, and so they are encouraged to have some downtime in between tasks and meetings and the work that they're doing. And so, a lot of times if I'm looking for somebody and they're not at their desk, I'll pop into the game room and usually track them down there. So, I guess that would be considered utilized time as well, since I'm harassing them during their downtime. But all right, the next one that I want to talk about was billable versus non-billable or productive utilization, right? So there are activities, tasks, responsibilities that engineers have or resources have that may not be considered productive time or billable time, if you will, right? But they are obviously necessary for them to do their work or to stay educated or do those types of things. So internal support and consultation, if one of my resources is being pulled off of their work to maybe help another engineer, to help our support team with something that's a little more complicated, or there are situations where maybe our dev team needs their time to help test some things. Those types of things are also considered by VHT to be non-billable utilized, right? We are using them and they are being productive, um, but they're not actually being able to bill for that. Sales support is another example of what might be a non-billable activity. So if a salesperson needs one of my engineers on a technical call to help explain something, the sales team will engage them, and we consider that to be productive, but not necessarily billable. Training and internal projects are two examples of other things that would be like that. So, so there are times where your resources will be drawn away from their billable or billable work to things that are just things that are required, right? And then one thing that I had come across not too long ago was an article that talked about utilization itself, right? And I found this article interesting because they talked about, particularly for professional services organizations, how some professional services organizations were moving away from utilization as a true measurement. And they were looking at other types of measurables like customer satisfaction, um, you know, customer intimacy, product leadership. So in order to make your product the best that it can be, you focus on the actual product itself, those types of things, operational excellence. So I found that interesting. And the example that they had given was, and this is coming from memory, so I'm not going to get it 100% right, but it was the Pony Express, right? Pony Express basically, it seems, went out of business in one day, and that was when the railroad was completed, and so you kind of lost that they needed to refocus, right? So as soon as that railroad was finished, they no longer had a need for the Pony Express. So it's kind of the same thing with utilization. We need to start focusing on some other things um, that might actually carry the professional services organization more strongly than your utilization metric. All right.
Chris, and you know that the final spike to the railroad was in the middle of nowhere, Utah, right?
It
I
was
happen to
probably
live in
right
Utah.
down the street from you, wasn't it, Tim?
Yeah, I live in the middle of nowhere.
Did you drive that spike yourself?
I do have a few years on me, but
I
not
am
that
way
much.
older than you are. I don't even know why I'm making fun of your age.
So the last component that we feel like is important to project success is simply project management. And as a group of project managers on the phone, you're probably going, well, duh. But what we mean by this is true project management. PMI teaches us initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, controlling, and closing. And there's 24 elements of planning alone that the PMI says that you've got to do. We're not here to submit or to debate whether or not you should follow it all their way. I have my own opinions on that I'll keep to myself. But what we mean by project management is you've got to have a way to initiate a project through appropriate planning and insurance that your utilization is accurate and your forecasts will meet the needs of the project opportunities and then ultimately the capacity of what it is that the company wants to do and there to do it. And there's an interesting statistic that only 58% of organizations really understand the value of project management. One of the things that I've seen going out to these many hundred organizations, some of the biggest companies in the world, is project management is wholly different. It's looked at differently in every organization. And sometimes people think that just tracking the things that you do and communicating together that you're getting them done is project management, and I would submit it. True project management is ensuring that you've got forecasted effort against the right people during doing the effort during a period of time that's defined, and that ultimately it fits within the right opportunity. And so I won't read the statistics that we've got here, but what we mean by project management is do it. Actually plan the work, monitor the work that's going on, and make sure that it's controlled within the organization's capacity. So that's it from Chris and I. I think we'll turn it back over to Lindsay and make sure that if there's any questions that we can address them. Thank you all for your time today. We would love to get your feedback. We'd love the debate and deliberation about what this is and what your feelings are on what we feel the 5 pillars of project success are. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Really extremely valuable insights today. I just like this one. I know PMI does this every year and talks about the value of project management, but not any news here, but it's since they go through the exercise, it's nice to see that it's validated a little bit. So like that one. In summary today, we learned a few things today from these kind gentlemen that were nice enough to take their time and explain some of this stuff to us. So I thought some really good nuggets came out of today: managing capacity, forecast, efficient project management, and essentially just become more predictable with your business so you can deliver on the promises set out to the organization, build credibility and trust along the way. So really good stuff today. For anybody that doesn't know who Keyed In is, just wanted to give a quick introduction. We do professional services and project portfolio management, hundreds of customers around the globe. Keyed In was founded in 2011. It was an acquisition out of the UK in 2012, which is the Keyed In Project's product. Significant R&D into the product between now and then. I won't give you the full sales pitch. Our sales team is definitely much better at that than I am. But if you are interested in learning more about Keyed In, we pride ourselves on our adoption rates, and really big testament to Tim and his team on people actually using the product, getting some value out of it, and continuing to renew with us. So like to see all that happen. Again, if you're interested in learning more about Keyed In, go ahead and let us know, and I'll connect you with one of those fantastic sales reps that I mentioned earlier, and we'll continue the conversation. Love to hear from you guys. So I'll give you guys a minute to enter your polling question answer in there. Let us know if you'd like to talk further, or if not. And I think we have a few minutes for questions that came in today. Feel free to keep entering those into that chat box, and we'll take a look at it, or the Q&A. I think either will work. The first question that came in today, and wanted to address this one: predictability seems to only be a problem in a waterfall development model. Agile accounts for this on several fronts. Wanted to get the presenter's take on this one. Maybe let's start with Tim.
Sure. It sounds like we may have a Scrum Master on the phone. I don't disagree with you, but I don't necessarily agree. I think predictability comes from the exercises that we define herein. Predictability is inputting an element of planned effort. And I know that Scrum Masters are really good at that. You'll go into your Kanban boards and you'll say, here's the totality of effort inside of the sprints, or even the Kanban at a higher level, depending on how you manage them. And it's going to take this much time, and this is the team that I have, and I've got to do that. I do believe that in a waterfall environment, if appropriately planned, you can have the same predictability. The difference is the waterfall environment, you're right, has predecessor constraints on them that Agile sometimes doesn't. But I like to think as the right amount of balance between Agile and waterfall is something that I lovingly call watergile, and that if you use a little bit of both, that you can have that same prediction. You're right, you have to be somewhat agile, and you have to forecast all of the work without all of those constraints, but being able to to predict in either methodology, I believe, is absolutely doable. But great question, Matthew. Thank you so much.
Awesome. The next question that came in was actually about the capacity planning. Do these tools, so Tim, I know you talked about managing in a spreadsheet and some custom made super secret method. Is there any kind of tool that helps you manage this capacity today, or is that still more of a spreadsheet, custom made, homegrown system?
So before I was introduced to Keyed In, I didn't think that there was a tool that could actually do capacity planning. And I wasn't looking for a new position when I joined, and an old friend of mine reached out and said, "You've got to see this." And I said, "I'm calling your bluff. There's no way that there's anything out there that can actually manage the resources with a forecasted input that could tell me whether or not we should or shouldn't do something." And I would submit, and I think that a demonstration of Keyed In would prove that changed my opinion very, very quickly. And when I saw it after having been in an environment where I had to sort of create it myself, and then in another environment where no matter what we did to the tool, we couldn't quite get it to do what we needed it to do to issue capacity planning, that our tool, the Keyed In tool that I now have the chance to work in, and I manage, and my managers manage their teams within the tool to an element of capacity planned. And so if whomever asked that question, I would recommend that you have a deeper look at Keyed In, because I think you'll be as surprised as I.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Really quickly, I wanted to throw the answer to this PDU credit question. It came up. We partner with projectmanagement.com, but we're not actually a registered education provider for PDU credits. Since we're a vendor, they typically don't like that. But our content does typically qualify. You just need to submit it under self-directed learning, and it will typically count for credit just because of the nature of the content. So just wanted to get that one out of the way really quickly. Is there any other questions that came in here? Let's see.
Lindsay, it looks like Tom suggested or said it would be nice to have a webinar that's a demo of Keyed In. Tom, I think that's something that our marketing team might be able to arrange. And in the meantime, we're happy to give yourself and your team a presentation as well.
Yes, we can definitely set you up with a demo. All right. Oh, there's a question about forecasting. It came to Chris. Do you benchmark against the original resource, or do you continue as a rolling forecast? Just wanted to provide that answer for everyone.
Yeah, and I dropped that into the chat window, but we do both actually. We take a snapshot of our first forecast, right? Set a stake in the ground, but we continually forecast on a weekly basis, just to make sure that everyone's aware of where we are from the target, what those reasons are for any forecast changes, and just to give a little plug to Tim, Lindsay, and team. We use our PSA as Keyed In, and so we're able to publish that data near real time to all of our stakeholders, so they have that visibility. So they know in the beginning of the quarter what that forecast looked like, and today what that forecast looks like, and any reasons in between why that forecast changed. I hope that answers the question.
We didn't pay him to say that, I swear.
Trust me, they did not pay me to say that.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today. It looks like we are at the top of the hour. Appreciate everyone joining and listening. Please, again, follow up with your thoughts, questions, anything you have on the content, and look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Lindsay.